Hey everyone, and welcome to Insight with Dr. Seth, a self-improvement podcast where we gain insight into ourselves and others. I just want to share some super exciting news about the podcast in the next few weeks. We have a couple of guests that I think are going to blow you away in terms of the stories that they have to share. One, a stalking victim that's going to talk to us about what their experience was, how they coped with it, and how they turned the experience of being stalked into something positive to help other people. We also have an interview with a famous astrologer, People Magazine's resident astrologer, who's going to share with us all sorts of insights on astrology. Really looking forward to that. Now, just a heads up, if you like this podcast, one thing you can do to help support it is give us a rating. Whether you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please give us a rating. That helps support a new podcast. We've been going, I guess, about 6 months or so, but really, I still consider us a new podcast. If you like the podcast, please subscribe to it or follow it. Now, I want to just share a little bit about the interview that you're going to be hearing starting in a moment. This interview is on the topic of asexuality. A lot of people think that asexuality is something mysterious or something that they may even question if it's real or if it exists. So I'm bringing you someone to talk about it, someone who works extensively with people who are on the ace spectrum, but also someone who is a licensed therapist. You're going to meet Bauer in this interview, and I am so grateful for the service that they did to share with us about this topic. So, without further ado, please enjoy this interview. Welcome, Bauer. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. I want to formally introduce you to our listeners. We call our listeners the Insightfuls because you have to want to gain insight into ourselves and others if you're interested in this podcast and the kind of topics that we do. So, Bauer is an active community organizer and founder of ACES NYC, the group for Asexual Spectrum, or ACE, people in and around New York City. She is a co-lead of the ACE Community Survey Team, which does an annual worldwide survey of the ACE community. Bauer is also a licensed mental health therapist and a data scientist based in New York, who provides therapy, workshops, conducts research, and has worked with many people on understanding their identities, particularly around asexuality. So welcome, Bauer.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I want to make sure that I get this right. ACE, right? Or the short term we use for the asexual spectrum?
Yes, for the spectrum. Asexual is a part of the spectrum, and ACE is like the umbrella. It's a short version of asexual spectrum, but means everybody underneath the larger umbrella.
Great. So when we listeners think ACE, we should be thinking the asexual spectrum. That's right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay, great. This may sound like a pedestrian question, Bauer, but is sexuality complicated, do you believe?
Incredibly. So complicated. That's what I've experienced myself. But there's always the possibility for somebody to say, it's not complicated. It's just like this for me. But that's one individual. And so the variety across the board is tremendous. And so I would imagine that sort of makes it pretty complicated, that just because you understand one person doesn't mean you understand anything about somebody else.
That's right. And you know, part of what I love about psychology, what fascinates me about it, is that there's no facts that I can get if I go over to the fax machine that will print out something and explain with 100% certainty why it is the way it is. There are so many factors that underlie so many of the reasons why we are the way we are. I would have to think that part of the complexity of sexuality has to do with the unanswered question to a large extent about biology versus environment. Sexuality, why is someone one way and another person is another, right? Do you think that has to do with it?
I think it's a part of it. that would be a part of it, and that there's also a bunch of other parts about it, and also probably things that we don't know would also be a part of it.
That's so true. Well, I love that answer because your whole answer is just under an umbrella of a spectrum. Because I tend to be a little bit more cognitively rigid. Sometimes I always want to put everything in compartments and boxes. And so the time you and I spend today, I can already tell you're going to be helping me gain insight into the fact that not everything needs to be a box that gets checked. Okay. I just want to start with what psychologists who are in my career learn about asexuality. This will show people just how absent it is. So I had a very traditional route in my training, majored in psychology at Vassar College for 4 years, went on to get my doctorate in clinical psychology. That was about 6 years. There was almost no training whatsoever in asexuality.
Yep.
So I learned and studied homosexuality, bisexuality, heterosexuality. I even studied, to some extent, the American Indian two-spiritedness, but in all my years of psychology training, almost nothing for asexuality. How do you think it's come to be that it's such an unresearched, undiscussed area?
I think that the internet really helped people come together, because without it, how do you find somebody else? There's still an idea from many people that sexuality and being sexually attracted to others is an inherent part of everyone. And if that's what you hear all the time, if you're not feeling that, then why would you think that there would be a bunch of other people like you? And we're still trying to figure out how to find each other. And I think that just how pervasive it is that it's assumed that everybody experiences sexual attraction makes it difficult. But we're gaining traction. People are starting to learn. Gen Z, love Gen Z. Gen Alpha, I don't know as well, but like they know more than sometimes I do, even if they're not ace themselves, to be like, oh yeah, I have a friend or 3 or, something like that.
Okay. The Asexual Visibility and Education Network. This is an online forum dedicated to asexuality. I know that was founded by David J. Yes?
Yes.
And I know you know and work, I'm sure to some extent professionally, with David J. And you were talking about the importance of the internet as sort of a safe harbor, a way to connect for individuals. So here is how the Asexual Visibility and Education Network, AVEN for short, defines asexual. Quote, someone who does not experience sexual attraction. Would you add or change anything about that definition?
I think it's good enough, I would say. I go with David's idea of, if you think of these terms as a tool. This is a way that David has described things. If it works for you, pick it up. If something else works better for you later, put it down, pick up the other one. It's not a life sentence. You don't have to pick something and make that be who you are forever. It's here to describe you, not the other way around. And so if somebody, which I would imagine there'd be quite a lot of people, say, you know what, maybe once 5 years ago, I potentially experienced something that might have been sexual attraction, but it's easier for me to just say I'm asexual. That makes a lot of sense to me. So never, right? That's a very strict word. But if you want to use it, even if it's not never, then that still makes sense to me, that it would be useful to describe yourself as asexual. So I say it's a totally reasonable definition, and also I give a lot more room for flexibility than those specific words.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, because as you were talking, I was thinking, it's not like somebody's going to have to go to court and
Right.
finally raise their palm and give the definitive, this is what they are. I mean, what's the need, right? I guess when we really think about it, to be so explicit.
Yeah. I mean, I know people who describe themselves as gay men who are like, well, I liked kissing a woman once 6 months ago and don't really have any plans to do it again. And I say I'm gay, even though I enjoyed it and thought it was fun.
We are human beings, right? Sometimes we forget.
We're human beings. And also the words are useful for finding each other, for being able to explain who you are, but it doesn't need to be so rigid. So I don't see it as so rigid, even if the definition technically is.
I love that it doesn't need to be so rigid. That's one of the takeaways that I am going to file away for me. I want to ask Bauer, and it's certainly not necessarily an easy question. I know I have spoken with a lot of gay people who will tell you that they believe very strongly that their homosexuality is biologically based, that they don't have a choice in it.
Sure.
Do you believe that asexuality or being on a particular place on the ace spectrum is biologically based?
I think it's a factor. I think it's probably a pretty big factor. And like, I am more open when I feel really safe and very connected to somebody and all those things. And even when that's the case, even if my life would be easier to be in a relationship with a particular person, I still can't move myself from on the spectrum to totally off the spectrum. I might be able to be a little bit more sexually engaged in a way that I feel comfortable with. I say that I'm asexual sometimes. I'm probably demi a little bit. I'm not sex averse, where some people really are. And I would have access to more options for sure if I could move myself from being on the spectrum to totally off of the spectrum. There's a lot of people who say, you know what, sex is a really important part of my life. I wouldn't date somebody where it wasn't a really big, important part of their life, which is fair, but also means that there's a lot less people who would date me or other ace people. So I'd have more options, and I can't get myself to like swing so far that I'm off the spectrum. But there's like some amount of environmental movement in how secure, how stable, how safe, how connected all these other things are for me personally. Maybe for somebody else, they'd be like, I am this way and nothing will move me. That's also possible. But yeah, I would definitely say that there's a part that's sort of like innate and inherent. If somebody's being true to themselves, that they might move a little bit, but they're probably not going to like flip like a light switch.
Right. And, you know, gosh, just another example as we're talking that I think makes sexuality so complex is then also just the element of personality. I mean, personality is in the mix too with anyone's desire or lack of a desire for sex. And it's very difficult to tease it out. When you were talking, Bauer, I was thinking what we are, who we are sexually to some extent. It's almost like a personal fact for us. We can try to explain it to others. They may or may not understand, but to some extent it is what it is. I was thinking about you talking about how some people could maybe move somewhat, but not in a large way. I was thinking about a female friend of mine who has shared with me that her sexual preference would be to have sex every day in her relationship. Now, to me, that sounds almost awful. And I think there are probably a lot of people that if they had to think about in their relationship being sexual every day, they would feel like someone's just pawing at them, like, leave me alone. I think the average person does not want to be sexual every single day. And you can't make someone,
Right.
you can't make someone want something sexual that they don't, right?
Right. You can have society pressure people into thinking they're supposed to do it, and then they might do it. And that's the other thing. It's like asexuality is a spectrum, but the whole thing's a spectrum. Because there's some people where once a day is not enough, right? Like, so
God bless them.
sure, right? And I hope you find each other, right? Like, I hope you find somebody where you match well with.
And stay away from the rest of the community that doesn't want that, yes.
Yeah, so it's like everybody's sort of somewhere along this, and hopefully people can find someone nearby what they want.
That's right. I read a lot of research in preparing to talk with you. I've been so looking forward to this interview. And some reports suggest that asexual individuals may represent about 1% of the population. What is your thought about the accuracy of that statistic, 1%?
I think it's as good as we currently have. I did my master's thesis on the data set that statistic comes from, which is from NATSL. It's from the UK. It's a national survey they do every 10 years on sexuality and lifestyle. And it's based on a Kinsey scale, which doesn't really ask about asexuality. But what it does do is it says, are you only attracted to the same sex? Are you attracted to the same sex, but at least once to the opposite sex, about equal, and then in the other direction? And then separately, it says, like, I've never experienced sexual attraction to anybody at all. And I think asexuality is more flexible than never to anybody ever. So on the one hand, it might be an undercount. Also, a lot of people don't know this is a thing. And if they did, more people might identify this way. So from the generalizable statistical standpoint of what we have, that's the best number we have. And as people hopefully still have the option to continue to explore gender and sexual orientation, at least in the US in the coming years, hopefully more people know what it is and that they feel more comfortable being able to identify themselves that way. And hopefully we will regain the ability to ask the question of what people's sexual orientation is in NIH-funded grants, which we've now lost, and then we'll have better information. But right now, good enough. 1%, good enough statistic for the moment.
Is there anything, do you think, that any listeners could do to help promote greater awareness?
Well, yeah, we are having grants and federal funding be cut for anything to do with sexual orientation, and particularly anything to do with studying gender and specifically trans individuals. So the executive orders that have been coming out have determined that more than two genders is unscientific and that the administration will not support any research into anything of that nature. The ACE community is really diverse in its genders. So 35% of the ACE community survey team's respondents are trans or non-binary. That also shows up in person as well. Researchers are losing their funding, potentially their jobs. Research, like grad students, aren't getting paid to work on grants that were already funded. Ones that were in the pipeline that were on the path to getting approved are being denied. I know that people are starting to fight for the right to continue to do research and to do scientific studies. Yeah.
I'm glad you shared that, because I didn't know that about the ACE community.
Mm-hmm.
I am so curious if you can help us understand a little bit about the realization process that happens for a person who comes to see themselves as being asexual. So as an example, I know a lot of gay people, a lot of straight people will say, when they were 6 years old, 8 years old, they didn't necessarily feel sexual attraction, but they could already feel the pings of whatever would come later, who they're going to be attracted to.
Mm-hmm.
Can you share for individuals on the ACE spectrum, when they kind of come to know or question their own sexuality?
Sure. Yeah. And it's different for a lot of people. There's this notion of like, oh, maybe you're a late bloomer, or you just it hasn't shown up yet. So there's a lot of room for some people to not necessarily know whether or not that's who they are, or if it just hasn't arrived yet. So it's not uncommon for ACE people to figure it out later. But there's a bunch of people who might know when they're in middle or high school, and the people around them are starting to behave differently and have all these feelings, and they haven't had any of those feelings. Even some people I know who might have identified fully as an adult they'll say, when I was a kid, I said like, oh yeah, I'm nothing, or I'm non-sexual, or I'm not interested in that, or those kinds of things. But I think for a lot of people, there's a little bit of a process of an elimination. There's a separate thing is sometimes people will identify as bisexual first because it's equal. And then it's later, oh, I realize that I like hanging out with people and I want to do these things, or maybe I have a romantic attraction to a particular gender. Like people might figure out I am gay first, and then later figure out that their sexual attraction is much lower than their peers. They start dating people and they realize that like there's sort of a mismatch that's hard to work through. So there's a lot of different ways that people might arrive, and I'm not surprised when it is a little bit later on in life, especially if they're religious, because they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, you know? So we there's definitely been some times when we have a meetup and there'll be like a contingent of sort of like young 20s people who grew up religious who are starting to realize, oh no, I went from doing all the things that were expected of me successfully, but now I'm supposed to get married and need to have a partner and do all these things. And now is the moment when I've crossed this threshold where I'm no longer doing what people want me to do.
Oh, interesting. So in a way, certain religious expectations protected them in a way. And then once they reach a certain age, all of a sudden insert the pressure.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Pressure. What a terrible word. You know, when I just said that word pressure, instantly, like I felt my central nervous system start to get a little activated.
And we have some really, really wonderful religious aces where it fits with their churches or with their synagogues or whomever, right? And that is great. And there's a lot of people where, yeah, you're supposed to have a partner. You're supposed to be with somebody. And when you're with somebody, then you're supposed to have children. And, you know, it doesn't always fit. And
yes. I'm so glad you said that word supposed to, because, you know, I think about this, what I often talk about is like a case of the shoulds. There are so many shoulds that almost ordain our culture, what we're supposed to be, who we're supposed to be. And it's definitely not the same, but just bear with me for a second because I think it's related. I'm thinking of this increasing trend that we see with adults who've made the decision not to have children.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, I've heard people in older generations talk about how, let's say 30, 40 years ago, such a decision, they were treated like lepers, especially if you were a woman. Oh my gosh, you're not a real woman if you don't have that maternal pull to want to have a child. And today, in 2025, I think it's just going to continue to become more common, people not having children.
Yeah.
But yet still, there is a little bit that dynamic. Well, why don't you have children if you don't have children and you're adult? Why not? There is still a little bit of a stigma. So I'm thinking, is there this similar pressure, this should, that a lot of people believe one should feel sexual, and if they don't, something's wrong with them inherently?
Absolutely. Yes, that's pervasive. One of the most common mental health struggles that ace and also aromantic people face is feeling like they're broken because something's missing, that they're not the way they're supposed to be. Why don't they have this? And I'm hopeful that as the communities get bigger and there's more of us to connect with each other, if you do want a relationship, you would be more able to find somebody who like is nearby you on the spectrum somewhere, and that what you need and what they need matches a little better.
So that you feel less alone, right? It's that sense of aloneness. No one understands. I'm isolated. You know, the factory made a bad model. I think, you know, these are not objective realities. And yet this is the way a lot of us feel. I can share, as a gay kid growing up in Ohio, I felt there was something just inherently wrong with me. I wish I could go back and tell that kid, you're okay. I don't want you to carry this lifelong sense of shame. But, do you think for people on the ace spectrum, there is an ongoing sort of reconciliation with a sense of shame, or is there an internalized, almost, for gay people, we talk about an internalized homophobia. Is there an internalized fill in the blank for people on the ace spectrum?
There's a lot of aspects of society that encourage that. I think that especially older people, there was less awareness. They grew up without any resources about it, any of those things. So for a lot of people, yes. Part of the reason I love Gen Z is because they're growing up with more information. They're growing up with more acceptance, with more openness, with more people they know who, are queer in a variety of ways, including ace. So the answer is yes. And hopefully it can be less and less that way.
Yes, I agree. I'm thinking about the presence of sex in so much of our culture. I'm thinking about sex in TV. It's everywhere on TV. It's everywhere in movies. It's in music. Constantly it's in music. I'm thinking about songs by Ariana Grande. I'm thinking about songs by Rihanna. And then of course we've got Justin Timberlake. He's bringing sexy back. It's everywhere sex. Does it ever feel sort of in your face, do you think?
It's in your face. Yeah, I mean, it is in your face. Or at least, in America at this particular point in time, it is in your face. Yeah.
And a turnoff? Is it fair to say it's a turnoff? Or if not a turnoff, it's what?
It's so pervasive that I find it refreshing when you find something that doesn't focus on it. Like, because I almost assume it's going to be everywhere. And then.
So this is a strange question. I never thought about this before, but we have been talking, right, about the way sexual individuals may judge asexual individuals. Are there any judgments, because we're all human, we're all capable of it. Are there any judgments ace individuals may have about sexual individuals?
I am so sure that an individual ace person has had every judgment about, like, somebody somewhere has judged everybody for something. I don't know if there's like a collective judgment besides just kind of wanting to be left alone. Like, just let us live, just let us do our own thing. Don't worry about us too much. Like, be nice to each other. Yeah. I'm trying to think if there's like an inside joke or something. Our inside joke is that cake is better than sex.
Love that. I love that. Well, and listen, one of the realities is there is sexual behavior, right? And then there is sexual orientation, and they are not the same things. I mean, I'm thinking about a lot of individuals when they get older, much older, and how does their sexuality change? So let's think about somebody at 70. Their sexual behavior is probably not what it was at 25. I'm also thinking about people who may have had long-term marriages and then got divorced and never remarried. Maybe their heart was broken so much, or they lost faith in love, or just lost a certain, whatever that mojo is that made them want sexual behavior with someone else. And then I'm thinking about my grandmother Betty, who passed away many years ago, and she was maybe 75, but she had a crush on the character Bobby from Dallas. I imagine at her age, she was still showing some degree of sexual orientation, that she could still feel that crush. And I think it was physically based. She found that character so incredibly attractive. And yet I think a lot of people, as they age, their sexual interest really decreases. So isn't that an argument about, in some ways, how fluid one's sexual drive can be?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't know a whole lot about losing it because I didn't have a lot to start with. But yeah, I think that a lot of things play into sexual attraction. And I work with couples sometimes where one person is ace and the other person isn't. And it's not just the ace people. Sometimes people who do have a strong sexual drive, if they're really stressed out, if they have other things going on, if they feel undesirable to their partner, there's so many other things that might reduce somebody's sexual drive or attraction and stuff like that. So I absolutely think that it can be fluid for sure.
Yeah. Recently on the podcast, we've had a couple of different episodes where we've been using this term that I never really used before, which is gamification. And how I'm thinking about it now is I'm wondering if there are some individuals who may encounter an ace person out on the dating circuit in the dating world, come to understand that the person is somewhere on the ace spectrum. And I wonder, do ace individuals ever have to deal with someone's annoying, arrogant ego that's like, well, you haven't been with me yet,
Time, all the time.
like they gamify this quest to make a person sexual?
Yes. Yeah, that happens a lot. That if we had a bingo card, that would be on it. You haven't been with me yet.
Okay. P.S. I really want a t-shirt that says, if we had a bingo card, because that's clearly going to be my favorite line from the entire interview. But yeah, as we sort of close our time together today, could you just share any other myths that you think are important for us listeners to understand, or anything else that you think kind of bothers ace people and maybe we should have a little bit more empathy of or be more sensitive to?
Yeah. So a lot of the myths that really affect people sort of revolve around whether or not ace or so aromantic is people who don't experience romantic attraction. So like ace or aro people, whether or not they can love other people or receive love. And so first of all, just because somebody's ace doesn't mean they don't have romantic attraction for other people. They might have crushes, they might want to be in a romantic relationship, but the sexual aspect isn't what's bringing them to that relationship, which confuses a lot of people. And at the same time, like a large part of a relationship is not while you're having sex with somebody, right? Like there's companionship, there's partnership, there's all these other aspects that people might still want. So that's sort of one layer. And that's also still true for people who are ace and aromantic. So generally, aro ace is how we say that for short. Just because somebody's aro ace doesn't mean they don't want companionship, but they might want platonic companionship. And a thing that is, I think, difficult for a lot of single people, regardless of their sexual orientation, but particularly prevalent for ace and aro people, is as you get out of school, as you get out of these environments where you run into the same people every day, all the time, people pair off. They have their own thing going on and they're less available to their friends. Friendships become often secondary, even if they are a really valuable part of people's lives. And so then we're grappling with this, like we're showing up for our friends, but it's not necessarily reciprocated. And there's this idea of, well, you're ace, so you don't need a relationship. You don't need it. Well, maybe. And also the importance of community and connection doesn't necessarily just die because somebody's not sexually attracted to other people. Yeah. So like the thing that the community is grappling with is like, how do we stay connected? How do we have reliable people that we can depend upon in a way that makes us feel comfortable, where we're not pushing ourselves to have sex if we don't want to, or an aro person isn't pushing themselves to be in a romantic relationship if that's not what they want. So the myth would be the inability to send or receive love. And also another myth would be that we don't want to have deep, committed friendships or partnerships because some people might not, but a bunch of people might.
So there are some aces who are in a relationship, right? They share an apartment, they live in a house together. That exists. So we should not think, people who aren't familiar with ace should never think asexual equals single or equals alone.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me.
One other thing is, so some people will say like, oh, did something happen to you? Did you experience some kind of sexual assault? Is this why you're this way?
It's a trauma reaction.
Right, that it's a trauma reaction. And first of all, if it is a trauma reaction, I want them to know they can come to our community, and they will be welcomed warmly and without whatever, and respected with whatever boundaries they need to have. And also, some people have never experienced anything, any sort of sexual trauma, and they still feel this way. So it could be both. And for sure, if somebody's experienced trauma and that's why they're here, I want them to be as taken care of as possible. And I don't care at all if that doesn't fit your definition of what we're supposed to label people. Making sure they're taken care of is the first priority. And just because somebody's asexual does not mean that they have experienced sexual trauma. And on the flip side, we're not immune to sexual violence. Just because somebody doesn't necessarily want to have sex doesn't mean that somebody else hasn't forced themselves on them. Big old complicated mess, which is mostly you can't assume in any direction.
Right. And also, I would just add from a psychological perspective, when we catch ourselves feeling that need to assume, we need to look at what the heck that means. Why do I really need to know what happens in that person's relationship, or why they want to be single? Or one of the main messages that I hear from you is we as a people must stop needing to make everything 0% or 100%, just in so many different ways in our lives. And I'll share as we sort of close today that I really think we do better, we serve ourselves better, and we feel more connected to our community, our larger community, the more we focus on our similarities rather than our differences. And the truth is, we could get really bogged down by details about trying to understand the, bisexual community or the heterosexual community or the ace community. We could get bogged down in those details. But the truth is, I'm thinking, how many long-term straight marriages do we know that actually are not sexual? How many long-term gay relationships are not sexual and don't have sex anymore? I really do believe we all are in many ways ultimately much more similar than we are different.
I think that's probably fair.
Well, it has been such a pleasure. I'm so grateful for the time that you spent and the service that you provided to help us gain insight into the ACE spectrum. If anyone, Bauer, were interested in learning more about this or connecting with the community, could you share how they may do that?
Sure. AVEN is a great resource. So asexuality.org, that is probably the biggest. It's also worldwide. If you are interested in New York City, ACES NYC, our website is aces.nyc, then you can find us there as well. AVEN's probably the most organized for general resources for everybody.
Okay. Well, you are a gem, Bauer. I'm so glad you spent time with us today. Thank you, and you have a good day.
Thanks so much. You too.
Bye. Time for the after show. Hey everyone, and welcome to the after show. I sure hope that you enjoyed that interview. I know I enjoyed interviewing Bauer. I was really struck in listening to so many of Bauer's answers, how much my own tendency is to want to put everything in compartments and categories and make answers absolute and check boxes yes or no. And I really appreciated how Bauer kept talking about how, it's important. Yes, there may be sort of rules to things, but there are also exceptions that, yes, maybe a lot of people are this way, but not all of them. Or maybe one person is a particular way in this respect, but not in all respects. To me, what I took from that is it is very easy. And there's something very appealing, I think, about black or white thinking. It's just something is all or nothing. It is or it isn't. When we can put things in compartments, then somehow we tell ourselves the world is organized. Everything is figure-outable. Everything is figure-outable. I don't know, though, if that's true. I don't know if everything is figure-outable. So I really liked that interview, and I hope that you are enjoying these interviews and getting something out of it. I really think it's so interesting to hear other people's stories and other people's perspectives on things, especially if you're talking about a topic, someone's lived experience, something that you haven't experienced yourself, or maybe don't have a good friend who's experienced. A conversation with them where we can kind of understand them better really makes them seem more familiar to us. And I think really makes us all seem a little bit more connected as a community. And also, I just want to share again briefly how excited I am for a couple of the upcoming episodes. One, with an interview that I'm doing with a famous astrologer, People Magazine's resident astrologer. That is going to be so cool. I'm so excited for that. And also, on a more serious note, a victim of stalking. That experience is one that can be really terrifying to people and can end sometimes not only in violence, but in death. And so you're going to hear an interview in the next couple of weeks on that topic. And I hope that it helps us all get a little bit more educated about something that is very, very, very serious. So, a lot happening on the Insight with Dr. Seth podcast. I hope you keep tuning in and enjoy it, and that we can keep getting insight into ourselves and others together. Before we end, I just want to leave you with a quote to go. And I think the quote is entirely fitting given the topic that we were talking about today. And it is from Oscar Wilde. Be yourself, everyone else is taken. Be yourself, everyone else is taken. With that, I wish you all a great day. Have a good one, everyone. See you next time.